Speaker. I think this is possibly the fourth debate I think that I've taken part in that's focused on fuel poverty to a large degree. Energy efficiency in our housing is absolutely key to tackling fuel poverty, as well as mentioned by the previous speaker, in combating, reducing the release of CO2 emissions, and indeed there is the potential for job creation through public investment in this area. I say energy efficiency is the best way to tackle fuel poverty because at the minute, as members will know, the UK parties are crawling over each other to see who can promise the lowest energy prices. And I think we should be very sceptical about those promises, because the fact is prices of oil and gas are going to continue to rise regardless of government interventions. In fact, the government is not powerless, but has little impact, can have little impact on energy prices. However, the government can invest in energy efficiency. So I do think we have to accept that cheap energy isn't an option, but reducing our reliance on energy through energy efficiency is an option that indeed the government can play a large part in, whether it's at a UK level or locally here through the executive. Northern Ireland's housing stock is, I would argue, in a particularly bad state. We have more winter-related deaths, excess winter deaths, in Northern Ireland per head of population than they have in Finland. Now, bearing in mind, in Finland, they can see temperatures as low as anywhere between -25 and -50 in the winter. It seems very strange to me that we're suffering greater health problems due to cold weather than they are in Finland, where literally during some winters the sea freezes over. We actually have the situation where Santa in his home in Lapland could be warmer than our constituents' homes in Limavady or wherever it might be. So I think that is something that we have to take seriously and we have to tackle. And the proposer of the motion made reference to levels of fuel poverty, whether they be 44% or whatever the exact figure is. We know our levels of fuel poverty are much too high to be considered acceptable. I think housing is, and again the previous speaker used this term, it's a key part of our infrastructure, but I don't feel it's given the attention of other areas of our infrastructure. And I would argue that our housing stock, our housing infrastructure is in much poorer state than many of our roads, but we could pay so much attention to roads and investment in roads, and we very much see this as a key part of public investment. But I don't think we have the same focus on our housing infrastructure. And with all due respect to schemes like the Warm Home Scheme and the likes of the NICEP grants, they're really a piecemeal approach to tackling what is a structural and strategic issue that needs to be dealt with. Very briefly, for new houses, we need to ensure that building regulations ensure that we're no longer building substandard, poorly insulated homes, and I think we have further work to do in that. The technologies and the processes are improving all the time, and we need to make sure our building regulations keep up to date with that and ensure that we're not on the one hand. Certainly.
Just as you raise a question about standards and house building, but is it not a case that recently that we have lowered the standards for houses to be built, and that's storing up trouble for the past, and even the debate we're taking place, pardon, it relates only to the housing executive, and the whole issue is much wider than just housing executive houses.
I thank the member for his intervention. I absolutely agree. I think both in DSD in terms of public housing and DFP in terms of private building, we need to ensure higher standards in legislation and put a statutory regulation to ensure that we're not allowing unregulated building or low regulations on the one hand, and then through the public purse having to retrofit later to make up for poor building quality. But only 1% of our housing stock will at any time be based on new homes, and obviously this motion focuses on the existing housing executive homes, and I do think they require particular attention. I thank the proposer for bringing this motion forward. It was in our constituency that the survey of housing executive homes took place and found the problems that he has outlined, and it has caused great concern amongst those communities. Indeed, it's something that I continue to be engaged with. The reason why I proposed the amendment to the motion, and I thank the proposer for his support, is I want to make sure that the review is as broad as it can and should be, because when we look at the cost effectiveness as outlined in the motion, I want to make sure that's just not the upfront price of the materials, but it takes into account those longer term costs. So when we look at insulation, it's not just the cost of the materials and the installation, but also the end-of-life costs we have to consider as well in terms of financial cost, but also the beginning of life and the full life cycle cost in terms of energy use. There isn't much point in trumpeting the improvements of energy efficiency of a particular type of insulation if it's been very high energy intensive in its production, or indeed of its disposal. So we do need to take these things into account, although I will be clear in saying that any insulation overall will make savings on an energy over its lifetime, but we need to ensure we maximise those savings. Further, the impacts of materials used should be taken into consideration in terms of the homeowner's health. Again, we're promoting the health benefits of a better insulated home, a warmer home, a less leaky home. But we need to ensure as well we're not actually putting in hazardous materials into people's homes that may affect, particularly I think around breathing ailments such as asthma. If I could quote Professor Tom Woolley, an architect who specialises in sustainable building, he says, "We rely far too much on glues, sealants, membranes and so on, which are synthetic, toxic, pollute the environment and often make disassembly very, very difficult." And it's that toxicity in particular that concerns me. Again, we must in this review look at the impacts the insulation materials have. Equally, in terms of longer-term costs, you know, if we're putting in materials which, as Professor Woolley points out, are difficult to disassemble, cannot be recycled, and potentially are being landfilled, whilst it may not be the Minister's department who pays landfill costs up front, but through council rates or through taxes, that those will be costs to the public purse in general. So we must, as I say, take into account the life cycle costs. There are a vast array of different insulating materials, whether they be petrochemical based on recycled materials or natural products, and I think these new products are being developed all the time, and I think the review must look at these different products, because while most installers, for example, in loft insulation will use fiberglass, it's by no means the only option, and I think through public procurement, perhaps looking at different materials that may be better in terms of environmental sustainability, in terms of life cycle costs, then perhaps we can drive innovation in this field and improve the options for homeowners who wish to fit other than fiberglass insulation. I think that can be a benefit. The more you kind of learn about insulation, the more complex it becomes, and I would argue any review does need to be carried out by somebody with the necessary expertise. As I say, the review should look at life cycle costs of materials as well as look at take a holistic look at environmental impacts. I support the motion because I think it's important, an issue to bring forward, to look at the issue in the Housing Executive, the particular issue with the Housing Executive homes. But I think it needs to be part of a wider conversation, wider strategic look at our housing stock, and I can't let my speech end without mentioning my regret that the Green New Deal programme wasn't funded and hasn't been implemented to look at this across our housing infrastructure. I support the motion and I thank the member for bringing it.
Thank you very much, and I call Mr. Fran McCann.